StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories, where biblical stories of the ages come alive.
We ended our last Bible story talking about a man who had two sons. The younger one took his share of the family estate and left home and went into a far country. It wasn't long until he had spent all his money on wicked pleasures, and soon he was taking care of pigs and even eating their food. All this time, his thoughts kept returning to everything he'd left behind and the love of his father, until at last he decided to go home. Continuing with our series on the life of Christ from the Bible, we now conclude the story titled Wonderful Teachings.
Precious memories.
StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories with your host, Dr. Joe Jackson. Stories directly from God's holy word, told in easy-to-understand story form that the whole family will enjoy, and featuring the work of a talented artist illustrating each week's story. Now gather the family, because it's time for this week's Bible story.
The young man was coming home from a far country, but when he was still a long way off, his father, who dearly loved his boy, saw him coming and ran to meet him. He put his arms around his son's neck and kissed him. The young man, who was ashamed of the life he had been leading, said, "Father, I've been wicked. I have broken God's laws, and I have done wrong to you. I'm not worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Bring here the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, shoes on his feet. Kill the fatted calf, and let us be merry, for this my son was lost, and now he's found." His orders were carried out, and the household began to celebrate the coming home of his younger son. Now the older boy was out in the field, and as he came toward the house, he surely heard the joyful excitement of everybody in a party spirit. He called one of the servants and asked what was going on, and the servant said, "Your brother's come home, and your father has killed a fatted calf because he's so glad to have him back safe and well." The older son was angry. It wouldn't go in. His father came out and urged him to come in and be glad that his brother had come back home. But the older boy wouldn't do it. He said, "I have stayed here all the time, doing as well as I could for you, and you never made a party for me. You haven't even killed as much as a kid for me, that I might be merry with my friends. But as soon as my brother, who's been away wasting your money, as soon as he's come back, you've killed the fatted calf for him." The father answered, "Son, you're always with me, and all that I have is yours. Still, it's right that we should be merry now and happy, because your brother was lost and he's found." Jesus spoke these three parables to show the children of Israel why he worked among the publicans and wicked people. These publicans and wicked people were the sheep that had strayed away and the treasure that had been lost. They were the younger son and had indeed been more wicked than their brothers, the scribes and Pharisees. They hadn't wanted to obey the law of God, their father, and to serve him, but had wandered away and wasted their lives in doing just what they wanted to do. But now they were learning how foolish they'd been, and were coming back to their father, asking him to forgive them. They wanted God to take them as his workers, and the Son of God, Jesus, was teaching them to do his Father's work. Soon after this, Jesus told two other different stories. In the first one, He showed how the people who care for money and what it'll buy in this world plan carefully for the time that's coming. The man about whom the story is told was not honest in his planning, and Jesus didn't praise him for that. But he did say that those who serve God should try to plan for the future and should try to make themselves liked by their companions. The other story was about two men. One was very rich and had everything he wanted, and the other was a beggar who was poor and sick and sat on the steps of the rich man's house and begged for the scraps of food that they were going to throw away. But there's another side to the story. After telling about the two men while they were living on this earth, Jesus told them that in the other world, the poor beggar was to have the highest place because he had served God in his poverty better than the rich man with all his money. Jesus showed the people that having good things in this life doesn't mean that good things will come to us in the other life unless we're good, unless we love God and serve God. One day a messenger came hurriedly to Perea to find Jesus. And the messenger said, "Lord, your friend Lazarus, whom you love so dearly, is very sick, and his sisters, Mary and Martha, have sent for you." Although Jesus loved this family, he didn't go to them right away in Bethany, but stayed 2 or 3 days longer there in Perea. For 2 days, Jesus said nothing at all about going away. But at the end of that time, he said to his disciples, "Let's go back into Judea again." And they answered, "Master, don't you remember that the children of Israel almost stoned you the last time you were there? Are you going to risk it again?" Jesus told them that he was going to risk it indeed because his work in Judea was not yet done. And then he said, "Our friend Lazarus is sleeping. I must go and wake him up out of his sleep." The disciples thought that if he could sleep, then Lazarus must be better. And they answered, "Lord, if he's sleeping, surely he's better." And Jesus said, "He's not sleeping in the way you mean. He's dead. I'm glad for your sakes that I wasn't there when he died, because now you'll have greater reason than ever for believing in me. Come, let's go to him." The disciples were almost afraid to have Jesus go back into Judea. Thomas said to the others, "We'll go and we'll die with him." And when they reached Bethany, they found that Lazarus was dead, just as Jesus had said. And they learned that he'd been in the grave for 4 days. You remember that Bethany was only a few miles from Jerusalem, and many of the children of Israel had come from Jerusalem to comfort Mary and Martha. They were a very sad and lonely family now that Lazarus was dead, because they loved their brother who had been taken from them, and they missed him very, very much. Martha heard that Jesus was on the way, and she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed in the house. When Martha came to Jesus, she said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to Martha, "Your brother will rise again." And then Jesus spoke to her words which have ever since that time cheered people when their friends have been taken away from them. Jesus told Martha that one who believes in him shall never die. Jesus told her that even though he dies on earth, he's living somewhere else and will live forever. These words were a great comfort to Martha, for she believed them. And she went back to the house to tell Mary about it. She called so softly that no one else could hear what she said. "Mary, the Master is come, and he's calling for you." As soon as Mary heard this glad news, she rose quickly and went to see Jesus, who had not come into the town, but was waiting there in the place where Martha had left him. Now, when some of the children of Israel who had come to the house to comfort the sisters saw Mary rise in such haste and go away from the house, they followed her, saying, "She must be going to the grave to weep there." Mary went away, and when she got to the place where Jesus was waiting, she bowed down at his feet. And she was crying. She was crying so hard that she found it difficult to talk. But she said, "Oh Lord, if you had only been here, my brother wouldn't have died." And when Jesus, the loving Savior, saw her crying, and the group of the children of Israel who had followed her crying also, he couldn't keep back the tears from his own eyes. He wept, Jesus did, for he too had lost a friend whom he dearly loved. The children of Israel noticed this, and some of them said, "See how he loved him." From others came the question, couldn't this man who opened the eyes of the blind have kept his friend from dying? Jesus asked, "Where have you laid Lazarus?" And they replied, "Come and see." Still weeping, Jesus went to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone," and someone took it away. And then, raising his eyes to heaven, Jesus prayed these words, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I knew that you always hear me, but because of the people who stand by, I said it, that they may know that you have sent me into the world." When Jesus had finished this prayer, he called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." The people looked on in wonder. No doubt the people watching wondered if it could be possible that Lazarus would indeed hear that voice and obey. But they probably thought that something like that wouldn't happen because Lazarus had been dead and buried for several days. While they were still talking in this way, Lazarus walked out of the grave, a living man. Many of those children of Israel who had never before believed in Jesus now changed their minds when they saw what he had done for Lazarus. But some of them who saw it went to the Pharisees and told them about it. At once a meeting of the great council, the Sanhedrin, was called, and the question was raised, "What shall we do? For this man surely works many miracles. If we let him alone, all the people will soon believe on him. And then the Romans, fearing that we'll try to make him king, will take away even the freedom that we now have." The high priest then stood up and said, "You people are not very wise about this thing. Isn't it better that one man should die than for the whole nation to be punished?" Before the meeting was over, it was voted that Jesus should die. And the command was sent out that any man who knew where he was must tell, so that he could be arrested. The council even planned to kill Lazarus too. They said, "For everyone who sees him will know that he was raised from the dead and will believe that Jesus, who raised him, is the Christ."
precious memories, unseen angels sent from somewhere to my soul.